Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope you had a fantastic week. And let's just have a show where we close out the week in a nice, good fashion and just go into the weekend better than ever, and we'll be back next week with even more fantastic content. But today's show should be a fantastic week concluder for y'all. We are going to be looking at potentially the last game of the NBA season, if you guys can believe it. Previewing, in terms of fantasy and betting odds, Game 4 of the Boston Celtics and Dallas Mavericks NBA Finals. We're going to be recapping perhaps the most exciting game to date in the Stanley Cup Final between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. And then, to round out the show, we are in the Euros mindset officially as the Euros start today, and we are going to be doing not one, not two, but three Euros team fantasy previews as the Euros begin today. It should be a fantastic show. But before we get into all that and we get you guys hyped for the weekend, where I hope you're going to be watching all these interesting Euros games for those people who might not be familiar with the world of football outside of the States, I do ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network. We do also receive a lot of tips and donations, so if you do feel so inclined, please leave them. Another look at a preview for our last segment. Sorry, guys. Please leave any tips and donations that you are considering leaving at the link gsmc.cloud. It is also a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network. So, if you do consider that, it is greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into the fantastic content I have for you to conclude this week. And we will start off in the NBA. This could be a very bittersweet segment, guys, because this is potentially it. This could be the game where the Boston Celtics wrap up, complete the sweep, and hang a record 18th title banner in the TD Garden rafters. So, this definitely feels a little bit sad, knowing that I may not be able to do another preview for another NBA game for quite some time. But without further ado, let's jump right into this one, and we'll ride off into the sunset if the Celtics do wrap it up, knowing that we will have another fantastic NBA season in a couple of months. So let's just get right into it. This kind of feels a little bit humdrum in terms of fantasy, so let's start off with betting odds for this game. Dallas obviously is favored. They're at home. Their backs are very much up against the wall. The over-under is 211.5, and the money lines are right now even. Dallas at minus 110 and Boston at minus 110. So there's a little bit of apathy in the betting trend here. They know that Boston is looking to sweep, and so the bookmakers are obviously kind of, level-headed about all this. They know that the Dallas Mavericks might want to come out here and deliver for their home fans, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised with any result. But on tonight's game, maybe shy away from the betting trends. In terms of fantasy, another kind of humdrum thing. Luka, obviously, still the number one player, most highly coveted player on the market in terms of price, at 13.6K on DraftKings, projected to have 61.6 fantasy points. La-di-da-di-da. Kyrie, after his outstanding Game 3 performance in a losing effort, only valued at 9K. I think he should be a bit higher. He is expected to have 40.5 fantasy points. In terms of the Celtics, because you never know what you're going to get, I'm just going to say that Jaylen Brown, in my mind, is going to be the most coveted fantasy player from the Celtics. He's looking to be potentially the finals MVP of the series. He's valued at 10K, projected to have 43.8 DraftKings fantasy points. Another guy who I'm going to throw out there just because who knows if KP is going to play in this game. I think that Al Horford is going to have a fantastic game. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but when he has been defending Luka, Luka has really struggled. He's the defender who Luka has most struggled with in this entire series, and that is a testament to the longevity of a guy like Al Horford, the way he takes care of himself, and the way he has transformed into a role player in this league who can really help different teams. Only valued at 5.8 in my mind. That is a steal for him. And 27.3 fantasy points. Now, I just want to name another Dallas Mavericks player in terms of fantasy, but it's definitely up to him to step up, and we'll get more into that as the segment goes on. P.J. Washington, valued at 6.2K, 28.5 points. Look for him to be kind of that sleeper utility player in fantasy, and someone who just needs to step up on the court in real life. Now, let's just get into that kind of whole storyline surrounding the teammates that Luka Doncic has and the kind of fallout from his fouling out in Game 3. Now, obviously, the fence is split with this one. The whole situation, there are two different mindsets. What Luka did was wrong. He always complains, and it's always going to be like that. My mindset is kind of in between. Yes, what he did was unprofessional, but also, A, it was bound to happen, like I said yesterday, and B, the Boston Celtics have just been pestering him on both ends of the floor so much. Like, what do you expect of a superstar? When you're a superstar with that much pressure on you, and you're facing a team that is such well-rounded in both areas of the floor, they can pick on you, they know your weaknesses immediately, and they take advantage of them. It makes sense for someone to lash out if they are a huge superstar, and that's exactly what I think Luka did. It definitely was detrimental to the team. It definitely disrupted the flow of Kyrie's game. He was in his bag. Luka did not acknowledge that, and ultimately the Mavs fell short when they could have stolen that game and made this a closer series than it is. I think that right now Luka just feels very isolated in this team. The story has always been, throughout this postseason run, Luka and Kyrie will bail out the Dallas Mavericks due to the fact that they are simply unstoppable and the fact that they are fantastic distributors of the basketball. That hasn't happened in this NBA Finals. Now, whether you decide to blame Luka for this or his teammates, I do think that the teammates are doing absolutely nothing. I know this could be a testament to the Celtics defense, but there's no movement in this Dallas offense, no signs of life from any of the other role players outside of Luka right now. The whole offense for the Dallas Mavericks this series has been Luka Doncic getting to his mid-range spots, shooting jumpers, but the whole point of what the Dallas Mavericks did to get to this point was shoot the corner three, have Luka not just be a scorer but be a distributor, and that has been taken away from them. And so the huge question in my mind is, does Luka deserve to be frustrated, or are his teammates frustrating him? Because right now Luka has definitely done all he can to bail out his teammates. Now I think the teammates need to step up, and we saw that with Kyrie Irving, who is kind of a different story in his own right, where he had a huge Game 3 and Luka kind of let him down, and Kyrie was trying to be the reasonable one in that situation. But still, you're Kyrie Irving. You've been in this situation before. Luka hasn't, and he needs help. You can't have just 1 out of 3 good games in this NBA Finals, if you understand what I'm saying. This definitely does make sense fantasy-wise to talk about, just because players like Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford have barely even scratched double digits, or even the teens for that matter. Derek Lively only had 1 good game as well. And then P.J. Washington only had a couple good moments in these games as well. And so, you can say whatever you want about Luka Doncic, but if you were in his situation, I would certainly feel as if I needed to lash out at something, because it certainly doesn't feel like a very collective unit right now in the Dallas Mavericks locker room. There definitely feels like there's a disconnect. Maybe it's just due to the fact that the Celtics are simply sucking the energy out of what they do so well. But still, Luka Doncic has time and time again proven that he can, outside of all his complaining about fouls, be a superstar in this league. He is in the NBA Finals for the first time in his career, and ultimately he is going to learn from this situation. He's going to learn from the experience of being beat by a far superior team. But I just want to see some effort from his teammates. when you're in the NBA Finals, you're not just playing for pride right now. You are playing as a collective. You need to play as a collective unit. In terms of the Boston Celtics, that is what they're doing. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown don't care about how many times they foul people. They don't care about the shot creation they get. They care about, hey, if we're cooking, we're cooking. Because we can be one of the best duos in the league when both of us are on our games. But if we're not, let's get other people involved. They are constantly moving the ball, confounding and confusing this Dallas defense. And that's part of Luka's frustration. But his frustration is warranted when we consider the fact that the Boston Celtics, unlike the Dallas Mavericks, irregardless of whether or not their stars are having a good day, are being the better team. They're being the bigger team right now. They are being reasonable. They refuse to die in this series like we saw when the Mavs had a furious late surge and then somehow the Celtics got it together and won that game. We are seeing that right now the Boston Celtics are hungrier. Obviously, I hope that Luka learns from this experience and takes it with him as he progresses throughout his career and hopefully gets to more finals, because I definitely think that he can. But as of right now, the Boston Celtics are just absolutely dominant. However, I do feel that this game could go either way. I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas forces a Game 5 and the series has to go back to Boston, and maybe there's a little seed of doubt planted in Boston minds. But I would definitely not be surprised if Boston swept this series. And so that is what I'm going to pick. I think that Dallas will cover the spread, obviously, because there have been some pretty close games. But right now, I'm leaning more towards Boston sweep than Dallas doing anything. Obviously, the home crowd could be a huge factor, as we saw in Game 3, and Dallas could get out to a huge lead. But Boston, just know, will not be feared by that. I'm looking for both Jays to have huge fantasy games. Luka will obviously have a huge fantasy game. But the rest of how this fantasy implications go is up to the Dallas Mavs as a team. But that will just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up next, as we always do, maybe for one of the last times in this show before we say goodbye to these two beautiful sports, we transition from basketball to hockey. We'll be recapping probably the most exciting game to date in this series between the Florida Panthers and Edmonton Oilers. We will be right back to discuss that. You don't want to miss this segment on what could be the last time I ever say the words transitioning from basketball to hockey on this show. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into the second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you guys that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network, so anything you leave is greatly appreciated. Also, if you do have a burning question about any segment that I've done in the past, have done on today's show, you can leave it there as well, and it will be answered at the beginning of the next episode. Now, I hope you guys definitely enjoyed that last segment. It could potentially be the last one I do for quite some time, but we definitely know that we definitely have one more of a hockey segment after today's one, because Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers took place last night. And it definitely proved to be one of the most exciting games in what was kind of becoming a very flat series, as the Florida Panthers have asserted their dominance so vengeantly. And, it's just such a dominant performance by them. But let's get right into the fantasy stats for this game. Obviously, if Sergei Bobrovsky did not exist, the guy who I've been praising throughout this entirety of the postseason, Sam Reinhart, would be my pick for the Conn Smythe Trophy. Last night he had 8 fantasy points, 1 goal and an assist. And also for the Florida Panthers, how about Alexander Barkov? Obviously not playing as if he's injured right now. 8 fantasy points, a goal and an assist as well. In terms of the Edmonton Oilers, thank God they were able to score more than 1 goal in this series to prove that they have at least an iota or modicum of moxie in this series. And yet again, it was a defenseman that kind of propelled them. 2 defensemen, in fact, but one that I really want to highlight. Young 22-year-old defenseman Philip Broberg with 5 fantasy points, a goal last night, and a +1 ±. And ultimately, McDavid did step up his game, even though it was in a losing effort, with 7.5 fantasy points and a 2-assist game for him. Now, let me just say this. When I saw the Florida Panthers went up 3-1, that was definitely a kind of here we go again moment. The Edmonton Oilers can play as well as they possibly can and still not break down this Florida Panthers team that has just come out with a vengeance, now being the hunter, not the hunted. And so, the fact that Florida was able to get to the big lead, they smelled blood early on, I was just like, oh no. But then the Oilers surprisingly showed some moxie to get back into this game, scoring 3 goals, finally cracking the code that is Sergei Bobrovsky, and ultimately making this a closer game than it could have been. And so, kudos to the Edmonton Oilers for finding a way, but still, they're down 3-0 in this series. And after the game, even after the Game 2 loss in Florida, there was a sentiment around the Oilers locker room where they were like, we're still remaining upbeat, we're still saying never say die in this series. But I do think that there is a level of frustration within this Oilers team. And I don't think it's necessarily surrounding the fact that they can't seem to win a game off of Florida, no matter how hard they try, no matter how well they play in all areas of the rink. I think it's just a frustration due to the lack of experience they have in a final situation. Florida has been here before, remember that. The Edmonton Oilers feel like they should have been here much earlier, but they just feel like they're out of their depth right now. And I don't necessarily see a path forward for them to get back into this series. I think they could potentially steal Game 4, maybe because of the Edmonton home crowd and the atmosphere they were able to create last night. But right now, I definitely feel that even though they're trying to keep a happy atmosphere surrounding the team, try and keep an upbeat mood centered around their team structure, I just feel like the Florida Panthers are just one step ahead of them at every turn. Okay, congratulations, you got 3 goals past Sergei Bobrovsky. We got 4 past your defense. And it's just coming down to the fact that the Florida Panthers right now just know who they are as a team. They're no longer the team last year who, as the 8th seed, shocked so many people and then in the finals just completely fell apart because everyone was just injured for them. They weren't healthy. They weren't playing up to their full potential. And so, this year, they just came up with a full-on vengeance, swept through the Eastern Conference, and now we're seeing the finals, the true might of this team. And kudos to them for just absolutely not giving into the narrative surrounding Edmonton Oilers and their star talent, and just being who the Florida Panthers have been all season long. And that is the best team in the NHL. And so, I feel like the narrative surrounding why I feel there is a frustration surrounding the Edmonton Oilers right now is kind of because in this series, the main goal production for the Edmonton Oilers has come from their defensemen. And not necessarily saying that their defensemen have played horribly offensively, because they have been some bright spots in terms of how Chris Knoblauch has experimented with them in terms of their offensive production and defensive output as well, protecting Stuart Skinner, who's looking kind of rough right now. But the Florida Panthers are just taking advantage of when the Edmonton Oilers let their guard down. We saw that in Game 1 when Edmonton really could have taken that game. I could be sitting here right now saying that the Edmonton Oilers are 2-1 up in this series. That's how crazy and volatile the series could have been. The Florida Panthers are proving, hey, you haven't been here before. You can have all the stars. You can have Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard, who stepped up in this postseason. But we have the team. We have the knowledge of being in this position last year, the knowledge of being heartbroken, and the knowledge of coming out and having that vengeance and just taking it to every single team we face this year. And it's coming to fruition for Florida. In terms of Edmonton, yes, I do think that there are bright spots in the way they play, especially in this finals, but it's just not connected. That's the difference in the series. The word that comes to mind when I think about this series is intention. The Florida Panthers right now are doing everything with a purpose. They have a mindset instilled in them of just dominating the game both offensively and defensively in both zones of the rink. And the Edmonton Oilers are just lacking in that intention. Yes, last night I was kind of shocked by this level of grit that they showed in attempting to come back. But that just goes to show the Florida Panthers are already one step ahead of them. You score one goal, the Florida Panthers have already scored a goal to take a 2-goal lead, so it really doesn't matter. Do you see where I'm getting at? I kind of feel like the Edmonton Oilers right now lack purpose. They lack the knowledge of knowing who they are as a team. And I think that's really affected them, especially in these finals, when the Florida Panthers are like, hey, what are you going to do about our offensive output? What are you going to do when our team as a whole collective unit is pressing you? Edmonton showed that they can score goals, but it's not about scoring goals. It's about coming out and knowing you have a duty to your team to deliver for them. It's that level of self-belief that I still think is lacking in an Edmonton Oilers squad who have made some deep playoff runs in the past, but are certainly lacking that kind of self-awareness of knowing where they stand in the National Hockey League. They are definitely one of the premier teams, and I think they can get back to this point. Their championship window, as rapidly as it could be closing, is still open, ajar enough for them to get back to this point, much like the Florida Panthers have done. And right now, the Edmonton Oilers look passive. They look stationary. I know that's kind of weird saying that after a 3-goal performance from them, but it's just that the Florida Panthers right now believe in themselves, and I can't say the same of the Edmonton Oilers. But that should just about do it for this segment of today's show. It's kind of bittersweet, very kind of sad, knowing that this could be the last transition I have between basketball and hockey for quite some time. But I hope you guys enjoyed it for what it was, and if it's the last one, so be it. We'll have to accept that. But coming up next, today is a very special day, the start of the European Championships in Germany, as Germany kicks off against Iceland, but we are not previewing them because we previewed them yesterday, but we are previewing 3 very special teams in this tournament: Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands, respectively. You don't want to miss those segments. I highlight some fantastic players, some breakout stars. It should be a great, great end to a Friday afternoon show.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I really hope you enjoyed those two very saddening segments, but there's no time for sadness now because today is a very important day in the world of soccer, football, the beautiful game, whatever you want to call it. The European Championship start today as hosts Germany kick off their Group A campaign against Scotland in less than 4 or so hours if you're on the East Coast like me, so it should be fantastic. But we are not previewing Germany today. We are fantasy previewing not one, not two, but 3 fantastic contenders for the European crown this summer. Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands respectively. Some teams that definitely have the quality to go far, but it's definitely up to the style of play they adapt. And so I'm really thrilled that I'm able to present these 3 teams to you guys. But first up is Spain. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, Spain is one of those teams that in my mind really want to adapt a certain brand of football. The reason why they have been one of the most dominant sides in world football over the past couple of decades is the fact that their tiki-taka style of football has been so attractive to watch, and ultimately it hasn't really mattered that they never really had that one true striker who is just a target man that they could rely on always. Now we're starting to see that problem seep in. However, they do prove to be one of the most exciting midfields in this tournament, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But without further ado, let's just jump right into what makes this Spain squad so special. It all starts and ends with a man who is metronomic in the midfield. He always refuses to lose whenever he starts, as we saw with one of the most historic runs without losing in the history of the Premier League and the Champions League. He is just such a pivotal player to a Spain squad. He could be the difference maker for them in a tough group and in a tough knockout stage. Rodri. Right now, he is only sitting at 6.5 million euros. For a guy who I expect to be, at the very least, top 5 in Ballon d'Or voting, that is disrespectful what the Euros are doing to this man because he is such a fantastic player. He is the difference between winning and losing, quite literally. Rodri is going to be someone who is going to just be a leader for this kind of transition in a Spanish mindset from a team that wants to constantly pass you to death to one that really wants to score and go far in this tournament. He also does take penalties, unusual for a midfielder, so if you want the kind of metronomic guy who's going to progressively pass the ball of the pitch, maybe contribute with a couple of assists, and also takes penalties in a Spain squad that really has so many versatilities in terms of who takes their set pieces, then Rodri is in fact your man and a no-brainer potentially at the midfield spot. Now let's transition more to the defense, because the Spanish defense is one that really is not as strong as some of the other contenders in this tournament. But if there is one guy I'm really excited to see if he transitions his club form to the international stage, could be one of the best players at this tournament, and that is Alejandro Grimaldo. Fantastic debut season at Bayer Leverkusen in their unbeaten Bundesliga title run. Just such a fantastically creative player at a fullback position. This goes to show how that defensive solidity can turn into attack in an instant. It just goes to show how versatile some of these European players are becoming. And Alejandro Grimaldo, obviously one of his first tournaments for this Spanish side, I'm really intrigued to see how Spain uses him, because if they do use attacking fullbacks to kind of push up the pitch, then they could be much more dangerous as a goal-scoring threat than people see them as of now. And so Alejandro Grimaldo at 5 million euros, look for him to be one of those strong crossers into the box. Look for him on corners, set-piece specialist who could honestly have a breakout Euros campaign in my opinion. Now let's look to that attack. It's not the worst in the entire world, but it certainly is one of the more disappointing, shall we say, over the years, especially due to one man who really needs to find his scoring boots if Spain needs to go far in this tournament. A much maligned, controversial kind of striker in Alvaro Morata, who is at 8.5 million, a little overrated in my opinion, but I can kind of see where he can have a tournament that people will be pleased with. He is very risky, in my opinion, especially if you're someone who wants to build from the front. I don't necessarily think Alvaro Morata is your man. However, I think this whole Spanish mindset definitely helps him, because he can get integrated into the team more. He's not necessarily going to have to be the focal point of what they do attacking-wise. And he could play and drop centrally and maybe even score some assists for your fantasy squad. He's not necessarily the biggest goal-scoring threat as we've seen in the tournament. In fact, he doesn't necessarily have that whole scoring mindset. It's just this industrious kind of quality about him that maybe is the reason you pick him up, due to the fact he's unlike any center forward in this tournament. And I really think that he doesn't necessarily have to be. He definitely can contribute, as we've seen off the bench in the past for a Spanish squad who might struggle later to games to find that goal-scoring threat. And so, potentially in the knockout round, should Spain get there, Alvaro Morata could become a bit more appealing. But as of right now, I still think he's a bit too risky. A guy who I'm really high on is risky, but I think can actually produce for the Spanish attack, Dani Olmo. I really love Dani Olmo as a player, still young in his prime. Just a fantastic winger. One of the most underrated RB Leipzig players right now, in my humble opinion. Just due to the fact he can score goals in bunches. He has a couple of hat-tricks in his career. It's just due to his creative flair. Spain certainly needs someone in that attack who's going to say, hey, I'm going to take over, I'm going to cut inside and shoot, and Dani Olmo can be that guy. Whichever wing he plays on, look for him to have a very, very intriguing Euros campaign. We'll see if he can find his goal-scoring shoes, because when he does, he's one of the most dynamic players in the world. And so, Dani Olmo, right now, 7.5 million. If you want that creative spark, Dani Olmo's your man. Another guy, the youngest guy on the Spanish team, and potentially in the history of the Euros, if he does get enough minutes, Lamine Yamal. Lamine Yamal has been a huge breakout star, graduating La Masia a short time ago and completely rejuvenating this Barcelona squad. One of the reasons they made that deep run into the Champions League. And he's just, for someone so young to just have that poise, is what really impresses me. We've seen it in the past with a lot of different players who will also be starring at this tournament. But the thing about Lamine Yamal is that in a Barcelona system where they were really struggling to find a particular identity under Xavi Hernandez as he ended his Barca career as their manager, Lamine Yamal really showed the potential and future of this Barcelona squad as they make that transition. He's going to be a huge part of how they rebuild. And it's going to show at the Euros, because he also might be coming on in a situation where Spain might need to score a couple of goals. So look for him to be that spark plug for them should they need him off the bench. But as an overall recap of what I think of this Spain team, I really think that the Spain team is a bit underestimated because of the fact that they're one of the only teams in recent history to go back-to-back in the European Championships. They have the pedigree, they have the quality, they potentially have the best player in the world playing for them in Rodri, who can really help in that midfield. But there's just so many questions in how Luis de la Fuente, their manager, wants to set up his attack. He knows that Alvaro Morata might not have as much confidence as games go on. He knows that Dani Olmo on his day can score goals, but is mainly one of those more creative, flair-like players on the wing. He knows that he has electricity off the bench with guys like Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal. So Spain is going to be someone to watch. They're definitely also in a very tough group, in the group of death, with Italy, Croatia, and Albania. So we could see a potential group stage collapse. I don't necessarily think so. even if they're not second place, I do see them as one of the 4 best third place finishers in their group. So I do think they will make the knockout stages, but how they fare in the knockout stages really depends on how you use that pace and dynamism you have on the wings, combined with this kind of metronomic, kind of solid presence you have in a guy like Rodri. And so Spain is certainly a team to keep your eye on in terms of fantasy as well as in real life in the knockout stages, because some of their players can have these dynamic moments if they so choose. It's just up to them and how the system is set up for them to go far in this competition. But that will just about do it for the Spanish Euros fantasy team preview. Coming up next, follow Portuguese? I don't know, but we are going to be previewing Portugal as our next team for this Euros fantasy preview. You don't want to miss this because there are big names, and one of the biggest names in world football I'm going to discuss in this Euros fantasy team preview, and you definitely don't want to miss that, do you? We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I really hope you enjoyed that Spain team preview. I really think they are one of the teams to watch, definitely in terms of fantasy, as the knockout stages progress, if they get there in the first place. But coming up now, in the 4th segment of today's show, is a Portugal team I'm really high on. They are my personal dark horse in this tournament. They have some of the best technical quality in the world, and ultimately one of the best players in world football right now, in Cristiano Ronaldo. Trigger warning there. All the lights are flashing in your minds when I mention that name. So without further ado, we are going to get right into this Portuguese side, who I'm really very high on. Now, Portugal has been a side who recently has had some success. They won Euro 2016 with a much worse team, in my opinion. And now they're quickly becoming one of Europe's most fantastically interesting teams to watch, one of the most fun, enjoyable, on-the-eye kind of football they've been playing in the past. Only team in Euros qualifying to have a 100% record, conceded only 2 goals. That's how strong they are from top to bottom. And I'm really happy that I'm able to preview them before they start their campaign, because they are going to be one of the teams to watch in this tournament, and my personal sleeper pick to at least to make the finals, if not win it all. So let's kick this right off. Obviously, we're talking Portugal. You may have heard of this guy, Cristiano Ronaldo. Enough said there. Cristiano Ronaldo valued at $10 million, still kind of pricey, and for how old he is right now, even though that might not even matter, it is kind of pricey. But when you look at the history he's had in this competition, you just have to swing for the fences with him, especially if you're someone who's really ambitious in how you set up your attack. Just go for him. The highest ever goal scorer in Euros history, the second highest scorer in qualifying this year, and the best international goal scorer of all time. I'm just going to leave those stats up there, and you make of them what you will. Honestly, as someone who has had painful experience with Cristiano Ronaldo as a German football fan, and what he's done with Real Madrid and Juventus to Bayern Munich, I can't personally love Cristiano Ronaldo, but in a fantasy situation I especially could, because of the fact he's going to score goals, especially in a squad around him that is the best Portugal has had in many a year. And let's just start off with Bruno Fernandes. Bruno Fernandes is obviously a very fantastic domestic campaign player, but in a Manchester United squad that has really struggled, his talents aren't necessarily fully realized. But in international Portugal jersey, Bruno Fernandes is one of the best midfielders on the international stage. He is just a fantastic asset, and his connection and partnership with Cristiano Ronaldo is really scary to behold when they get going. Bruno Fernandes, we know the intelligence and creativity he has. Domestically, it might not be as fully well-rounded as in Portugal because he doesn't necessarily have the attacking talent that Portugal has on the squad. But Bruno Fernandes becomes a different animal in a Portugal squad. And at $9 million, I'm going to take him in my squad. I would take him if I were you in my squad. 7 assists in qualifying just go to show his fantastic level of distribution. And ultimately, he's a no-brainer in my opinion if him and Cristiano Ronaldo are hot to start off. And then, a player in Bernardo Silva, who I really, really love. He doesn't necessarily come across as a huge goal-scoring threat. He's not a huge player. He obviously is very much a system player. Just fits so well into different systems. Not necessarily getting all the plaudits he deserves at Man City, but in a Portugal squad that has so much technical quality, he is the cream of the crop. Bernardo Silva is going to be one of those wingers who cuts inside, tries to find space to unleash a shot or get it into the box for guys like Cristiano Ronaldo. And so Bernardo Silva, if you're looking for someone who is just so versatile in how he plays, so interchangeable in the dynamics in the squad, Bernardo Silva is your guy. And I think he's a very low price for you guys, a cheaper option in your attack. So be wary of taking a flyer on him because he could pay dividends for you. Now let's kind of go to that defense, because the defense is one of their strong suits as well. They aren't just known for Cristiano Ronaldo. They are known for their potency in defense, and it all starts with Ruben Dias. Ruben Dias in the past couple of years has truly transformed himself into one of, if not the best center backs in world football. Just a fantastically physical style of playing the game in that Manchester City defense. One of the stalwarts of how they play and how they set up and what has made them so dangerous to score against in recent years. And so, slotting into a Portuguese side, like I said, has conceded very few goals in their qualifying. It's going to be a scary proposition trying to dribble past Ruben Dias. In terms of ball recoveries, in terms of interceptions, he's going to rack up fantasy points quickly. And he definitely is a no-brainer in my opinion if you're considering center backs. Now let's switch to the fullback position, where a guy like Joao Cancelo can really get going as well. He is one of the best attacking fullbacks in the world, obviously. He has bounced around a couple of places in terms of domestic club football. But right now, at home in Portugal, he is one of the best players in the squad. He is certainly someone that you kind of have to account for outside of guys like Bernardo Silva and obviously Cristiano Ronaldo, because of his ability to push high up the pitch, get crosses into the box, and even score from outside the box. He is a defender who I really like if you're looking for someone who can score that long-range effort, because he definitely is willing to let one be unleashed should he be in that kind of high up area in the pitch around the penalty box. So Joao Cancelo is certainly one to watch in this tournament in terms of the fullback position. Let's go back to this attack, and a player who I don't necessarily have on this screen right now, and I don't necessarily really think will have as great of a Euros as I want him to, in Joao Felix at 8.5 million euros. He's kind of like Alvaro Morata for Portugal. He definitely likes long-range shots, but he certainly is a flyer who I definitely wouldn't take at that price, at least in the group stage. Maybe in the knockout stages, as Portugal progresses through the tournament, he could be valuable as someone who's an impact substitute for you off your bench. But Joao Felix is definitely one of the most controversial attacking players in the world. When he was younger, coming up through the Benfica ranks, one of the most coveted young stars in the world. But right now, he's just bouncing between teams. His whole contract situation surrounding him domestically is just a mess, and it could transfer over to the international side of things. So when I look at this team that has just so much quality at every single position, I honestly don't see where Joao Felix fits into it. I do think that should he get a couple of minutes, I would be intrigued to see how he uses those minutes, because of the fact he does have that potential in him. He's still one of the preeminent players on this team. There are certainly guys on the bench in terms of attacking quality, guys like Pedro Neto, Gonçalo Ramos, Diogo Jota, who I think will get more minutes than a guy in Joao Felix, who I'm really kind of disappointed in and not willing to take a risk on, and someone who I would just overall shy away on if you were looking at attacking players for your squad. But it's the last final diagnosis of this Portugal squad. Like I said, they truly are going to be one of the most enjoyable teams to watch this tournament. Not exactly true dark horses, as they definitely have the quality to go all the way, and they have Mr. Cristiano Ronaldo CR7 in their squad. But they certainly have this kind of air about them that says, I'm here to stay. They're a hungry team. Potentially this could be Cristiano Ronaldo's last tournament, so look for him to kind of come in with a vengeance and want to do well for his country in potentially his last tournament, so we'll see how he plays. But I'm really excited about this Portugal squad. I'm really, really excited about them. They have so much technical quality. It's my favorite players in world football. And just seeing how this team interchanges with each other, the dynamics they create on the pitch, from top to bottom, the way they play their football, just so attractive in terms of their brand and style. I think it ultimately comes down to not the players, but the manager. Roberto Martinez, no matter how well he has played throughout qualifying as their new manager, he has been much maligned for not necessarily finishing the job. Obviously, with Belgium and their golden generation, he kind of failed to deliver any major trophies for them. And so, coming to a Portugal side that has seen success in the European Championships in the past, the pressure is definitely going to be on him to kind of give these players a certain freedom, because they know that they can do it again, and it's ultimately going to be up to how they set up and how Roberto Martinez manages these talented group of players. It certainly is one of the most talented groups he's ever had. And so, ultimately, I think that Portugal can make the final, maybe even the semi-final, but that's a lot of pressure on them, especially in a tournament where there are a lot of different underdogs and different storylines that could emerge from there. But that will just about do it for this Portuguese Euros Team Fantasy Preview. Last but not least, on today's show, coming up next for our final segment, we're going to be previewing De Oranje, the Netherlands, one of the even more dynamic defenses in this tournament. Should be a very interesting segment because of how well structured this Netherlands side is. We'll be right back to finish out the show with them. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's last segment for the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And it should be a good one because this particular team, when I look at them in the European Championships, is one of the more, shall I say, awkward teams to assess, because they are not necessarily known for their attacking prowess. When you look at their defense, they're one of the most solid in the whole world. I am talking about the Netherlands, the Dutch, De Oranje, one of the most storied teams in the history of Europe. Now, looking at this current Netherlands squad, it definitely seems like there's a very awkward transition from the experience they've had in the past to what they have now. But anytime we talk about a Dutch side, we have to talk about the defensive structure, because that is where they've always seemed to build their teams in past tournaments, and is going to be no less in this one. And especially in a team that has rotated their pen takers throughout their entirety of the lineup, trying to find someone who fits in that role. Look out for the Dutch defense to be one of the highest scoring in all of fantasy in this tournament, should they go far in this tournament. And it all starts off with one man who has been a rock in the Premier League for Liverpool for many years, and also internationally as well, Virgil van Dijk. One of the best center backs, like I said, in world football. Honestly, should have won the 2019 Ballon d'Or. But just his versatility in that position, his ability to lead. Obviously, if we look at his domestic campaign this season, he honestly had, probably in my opinion, his best season, because of the fact Liverpool had so many injuries in that defense, and Virgil van Dijk was tasked with reconstructing that defense, leading them by example. And all these young players truly stepped up for Liverpool because of him. And heading into the Euros, I'm really excited to see him in a Netherlands squad that will make him even better, and he doesn't necessarily have to worry about being a leader because of how strong and potent that defense is. He also could take a lot of penalties as well. He is a guy who has taken penalties for the Dutch these past couple of times, because they're not necessarily known for having one true penalty taker, because they've struggled in terms of penalties as well. So look for Virgil van Dijk in an unusual position to take penalties for Euros. So he should be very high scoring, one of, if not the highest scoring fantasy defenders in this year's tournament. He definitely has some interesting partners in the back. Obviously, Nathan Ake, Matthijs de Ligt, I don't think will play as much as people expect him to. So look for Nathan Ake to kind of have another huge tournament. Quietly been one of the better center backs for Man City. He's not necessarily, front and center in people's mind when they think of Man City defenders, but he certainly is one of the most solid players in this Netherlands squad. And then on the wing, Denzel Dumfries, in an interdefense that is one of the best in club football. Denzel Dumfries really has plied his trade in a way that really makes me intrigued to see him in a Netherlands squad that might struggle for goals, because much like some other players in this tournament that we've talked about, he can push up the pitch as well. He can invert, he can drop into the midfield. He's a fantastic defensive mind. Really slots in well. He trusts that Virgil van Dijk and whoever partners him at the center-back partnership will stop whatever comes his way, so that allows him to go up the pitch with more freedom and ultimately really help a Netherlands attack that really doesn't have a centripetal force for them this Euros. Now, when I look at the Dutch attack, they certainly have the excitement and potential for goals being scored in bunches for this Dutch squad. But right now, I just need to see how they shake out. Obviously, you still have a guy in Memphis Depay with one of your top overall international goal scorers for this Dutch side. But how many years does he have in him left? It certainly feels like Memphis Depay is really quieted down, obviously. Sometimes he really struggles in the tournaments of this nature, and it has been seen in past tournaments where he has really not really stepped up. He hasn't stepped up to the plate for this Dutch side when they've needed him most. And so, if I were you, I would shy away from a Memphis Depay. But if you want to take a risk on a Dutch attacker, there's certainly a lot of appealing options for you in that department, especially youthful options. And one guy who I really think could have a breakout tournament, we've been waiting for his kind of breakout moment, both domestically and internationally. How about Cody Gakpo? He is one of those guys who I really think can take over Memphis Depay's shoes, fill them very well, make that transition for the Netherlands much easier, and then just be that creative force at the top of the pitch who can really, with his movement off the ball and on it, help the Dutch try and create ways to get goals in the box, because that's where I think most of their goal production will come from. They're going to want to build up through the back and ultimately try and get the ball through the middle to guys like Cody Gakpo and their target men and stuff of that nature. Another a young, exciting attacker who's one of the most creative players the Dutch have had in quite some time is Xavi Simons. Fantastic loan season at RB Leipzig for them, one of the highest scorers on that team. A lot of creativity, a lot of assists he provides this side. I think he's much cheaper than any other Dutch attacker in terms of fantasy. So if you're looking for a guy to really take a risk on, who I think could have a breakout campaign, be in the race for Young Player of the Tournament, Golden Boy, I think that it could be Xavi Simons, just because of the nature in which he plays. Now, kind of going back to the defense. Obviously, you have the strong center-back pairing, wing-backs and full-backs that want to press up the pitch. But the big question mark for the Dutch is in between the sticks. Who is going to be the Dutch goalie? Last tournament at the World Cup, it was a very, very weird and interesting pick, in my opinion, for the Dutch, as Andries Noppert. Very tall, inexperienced goalkeeper, stepped into that role for the Dutch in the World Cup in 22. He made it all the way to the quarterfinals. Fantastic kind of one-on-one, but where he really hurt them was in terms of penalties. And say if they were in a penalty shootout, his height kind of was the problem for him, as he couldn't have that quick reflexivity that you need in terms of penalty shootouts. And so he is now not in the squad for this tournament. It's going to be a matchup between two goalies in the Premier League who are kind of underrated, in my opinion, due to the fact that they don't have the strength in terms of their back lines in that domestic kind of campaign, in Bart Verbruggen and Mark Flecken. Bart Verbruggen, in my opinion, had the better season at Brighton. I think he had some tremendous saves for them, saving a lot of goals above expectations in the top rankings in the Premier League there. And then Mark Flecken obviously had a much harder campaign, as Brentford really struggled this year. But that goalkeeping competition is really one to watch, because I do think I would shy away from Netherlands goalies because of the fact that they're not going to be relied upon as much. Obviously, whichever one emerges, they will definitely be much more appreciative of who they have in their back line. But I think that Bart Verbruggen will win out, but I don't necessarily think that he will be the reason why the Netherlands progress in this tournament. It will be up to the way they build out of the back, through their attack, through their defense. Look for Denzel Dumfries to have a lot of assists, like I said. But in my mind's eye, the Netherlands are the truer dark horse, in my opinion. Portugal is kind of the quote-unquote Trojan horse, in my opinion, let's just say, because they're not necessarily sneaking up on anyone. They are just there to surprise a lot of people with the style they play, perhaps. But the Netherlands certainly is more of the true dark horse, in my opinion. Mainly due to the fact that they just don't have as much strength from top to bottom as some other teams in this tournament. But if you're looking for, in terms of fantasy, no-brainers in your defense, guys who, A, are solid in terms of being that rock, that leader in your back line, look no further than Virgil van Dijk. And if you're looking for a guy who's so versatile in the way he plays in kind of more of a hybrid role, like I said when I was talking about the fantasy tips and tricks for this year's tournament, look no further than Denzel Dumfries. I think that he's going to be one of the most exciting fullbacks to watch in this tournament. He's going to be one of the most important defensive players for the Dutch, just with his pace and electricity in terms of moving into attack and then going back into the back line should teams press the Dutch. But then also, I'm looking for at least one attacker from the Netherlands to have a breakout campaign. It might not be Memphis Depay as he gets up there in age, but it could be Cody Gakpo. I'm really looking for something out of him to make me go, okay, Liverpool were right to sign you, and the Netherlands are right to trust you as their striker of the future. And then I'm also looking at Xavi Simons to see what he does. He seems like he's been around for a long time. It's still a very, very young player, one of the most creative young players in the world, quickly becoming highly coveted by a lot of different clubs. So this Euros will truly determine how people view a guy like Xavi Simons. Ultimately, I'm shying away from the goalies. I really do like both of them and what they did for their respective teams in the Premier League, but they're not going to be the reason defensively that the Netherlands will go far. Ultimately, for the Netherlands, I see them exiting at the quarterfinals much like they did in the World Cup last year because they just don't have that one player who's going to step up and be a superstar in terms of goal-scoring threat. They can keep out a lot of different teams, kind of put different teams at bay, but they can't keep them out forever. And their lack of offensive depth will really hurt them in the latter stages of the tournament. But that should just about do it for today's edition of the show. Next week, it might be a bit more bittersweet as we say goodbye to basketball and hockey in a little bit, but it gives us a chance to incorporate more and more different sports into this. Let me know what you guys like and want to see on this show. We are getting into football season, and when we get into football season, it's going to be non-stop, snap of the finger stuff. It should be really exciting in these coming months. But that has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast for today, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I have been Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Leave a tip, donation to the link gsmc.cloud if you do feel so inclined. As always, like, follow, and subscribe to the show. We will be back next week for even more editions of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Thank you guys so much.